And there's intimacy on the radio, and there's naturalness on the radio that can never be replicated on TV. The marvelous resurgence of radio as a political force in this country.
News-related radio programming is evolving.
There's a huge hole in our dialogue that can be filled by the synthesis of traditional radio and the freedom that comes from a live podcast. You're about to experience Cowboy State Politics live. Here we go. Good morning, my friends, and welcome to another tremendous installment from very, very high above all the puerile and insipid forms of Wyoming mainstream media. This is Cowboy State Politics. I, of course, am your illustrious host, David Iverson, firmly ensconced behind the silver Cowboy State Politics microphone and broadcasting to you from the base of the Bighorns at the Cowboy State Politics Studio in Sheridan, Wyoming. Good morning, my friends, and welcome to the program. Happy Thursday, and it is a very happy day indeed here at the program. Now, if you haven't listened to the podcast yet, you absolutely have to go back and listen to it. It is incredible, tremendous even. It's the best podcast that anybody's ever seen in the world. But what it is about the interview that Agent 29 gave to the Cowboy yesterday. Now, I was fully prepared to excoriate him for being a traitorous producer, but I can't do that because he did. He put on a masterclass in how to deal with the media. And of course, only the producer of Cowboy State Politics Live could have pulled that one off. Well, the truth is, everybody could pull it off because it is the cow pie you're dealing with. But Ken put on a clinic in dealing with the media. It is absolutely tremendous. And so, we rarely start out the program with a couple of laughs. But I think that today is a perfect day to do that because there was some one-liners, well, not really one-liners in the interview, but from the beginning of it until the end of it, Agent 29 was in control of Jake in the cow pie. And I have to tell you, my friends, I was watching it again. I watched it a couple times yesterday while I was preparing the podcast, but last night I went back so that I could put together the YouTube video and upload it to the Open Range Records so that we could, put it in with an accompanying article. And watching it again, I was laughing hysterically at it. It just how easily and how naturally Ken was able to handle everything that was coming from Jake in the cow pie. And here's the biggest part of it. I'm going to play you a couple sound bites here from it just directly. But the biggest part of it, I think, is that Ken, and we do this, I have told you this over and over on the program, but the number one trick in dealing with the media is don't ever accept the premise that they give you. So, for example, if I start out by saying, well, the Governor Gordon is kind of a terrible governor and he's trying to ruin the state. Well, the premise under that is that Gordon is a terrible governor. And so anything that follows that statement is based upon the initial premise. Let me give you an example. So one of the funnier parts of the interview is where Ken just goes right after the language that is used by the media. And what they do is they set up a narrative. And, journalists do this all the time. And I don't think that there's ever been a journalist anywhere that can write 100% unbiased. That just doesn't happen. There's bias that is implicit in the words that we use. And, depending on your word choice, it leads the reader down a certain line of thinking. And so when the media tries to characterize the work that was done by the Joint Appropriations meeting as a committee as well, you know what? I'm just going to play it for you, and that way I don't have to explain it, and you can just listen to it because it's absolutely tremendous. Listen to this one.
And due to property tax raises over the last few years. So don't tell me that that was drastic. The rest of the quote unquote cuts were actually slowing down the rate of growth. And we ended up doing that just a little bit.
Yes.
Okay, so hold on. So Ken corrects him and says, don't tell me that the cuts that we made were drastic, because they really weren't cuts anyway, a reduction in the rate of growth. So Ken corrects him and then allows the interview to continue. And what you're going to hear now is Jake tried to, I don't know, as Jen Psaki, which, you know, Jake and Jen Psaki are probably pals. But anyway, he tries to circle back and tries another attack at the argument. Listen.
I was just saying, well, whether we call them drastic or not, they were attention getting out of appropriations.
Wait now. Words mean things. And if you use the word drastic for a 4% cut, what are you going to use when we come in and say we need 10, 12, 15% because the bottom has dropped out of whatever industry? So save the words for when they're appropriate, because this hyperbole does nobody any favors.
2 + 2 is 4. Not 5 if you want it to be 5. And this is not to be discriminatory. This is to stand up for language. Words mean things.
Brilliant job for my producer. Well done. But see, that's what you have to do. And you would think that conservatives would know this intuitively. For how long have we listened to Trump take it to the media? Point out when they're lying. Point out when they're just not telling you the truth, or when at the very least it's just incredibly biased. But we should already know that the underlying premise of just about every question the media asks a conservative is one that's biased, and they're leading you down a road. And here's the thing, you know, Wyoming has a citizen-led legislature, or at least we're supposed to. And so most people that run for office, they're not trained in rhetoric. They're not broadcasters. They're not journalists. They're everyday people that see something wrong and they say, you know what, I think I can help out with that. I think I can fix it. And so they go to the legislature, and then they have to deal with people that use language for a living. That, you know, I mean, folks like myself, right? I've been doing this for a really long time. I've conducted hundreds and hundreds of interviews, and, you know, I'm pretty good at using language to make my point. Well, when your normal everyday legislator is confronted by somebody who this is what they do, it's pretty easy to lead them down the road where you get them to answer a question in the way that you want. And so when you don't accept the premise, and that is to say, no, we're not going to talk about your underlying thought behind it. Let's talk about facts. And that's what Ken did. Well, I think he was absolutely brilliant yesterday. Let me just give you one more. This is a pretty funny exchange. Remember the narrative that, you know, all of these Freedom Caucus folks, they're told how to vote each and every day, and they get text messages on their machines, and they can't do anything. They can't even get up at a microphone without looking at their phone. Remember that whole narrative, everything that the media has been pushing for, I don't know, the last 4 years. Well, here's how Ken handled it. Listen to this.
You've never had a session before with serious conservatives in there. That's the difference.
Sorry, I'm getting distracted by text.
It happens.
Yes. Well,
if that happened to me on the House floor, you know, it'd be on the front page of every newspaper that some Washington, D.C. overlord is telling him how to vote.
Yeah, we did see a lot of that.
Apparently, you have an overlord there telling you what questions to ask.
Well done. That whole text message was a gift from God, but I'd be willing to lay money on it that Ken was absolutely right. That whomever was watching that interview with Ken saw that it was not going well for Jake, and that Ken was absolutely in control. And so they were frantically texting Jake in the cow pie, trying to tell him what question to ask. But absolutely a brilliant job by my producer. And if you haven't watched the video, so we published, let me tell you this. So on the Open Range Record, I think it's the top story right now. We published an opinion piece, admittedly, about that interview. But in it is the complete video of Ken's interview with Jake in the Cow Pie from beginning to end. So you can go ahead and watch it there if you want to, or you can go listen to it on the podcast. I published the entire interview with Jake in the Cow Pie on, or a really big chunk of it, so you can really understand. Excuse me, didn't miss. Hold on just a second. Anyway, so there's multiple ways to get the full picture of exactly what Ken did to Jake in the Cow Pie. It was, shall I say, tremendous. All right, so moving on today's program, we're going to do a couple of things. I have an interview with Representative Harriet Hageman that I've been meaning to play for you. I bumped into her last Thursday in Wheatland right before she was going to do a town hall. And so we set up the microphones and the camera and did an interview. And I'm gonna play that for you here at the bottom of the hour. But there's a couple of things that I want to get to first. First, and before I forget, I do this all the time. You know, politics is funny, my friends, and we should all laugh at them. This is election season, and there's going to be a lot of really funny stuff that politicians say and do. And, you know, while you get irritated with all the things that come in your mailbox, there's going to be a whole bunch of them that stumble and say dumb things, and it's just going to be a riot. Well, you should laugh at it. You should laugh at them, and we should make fun of all the human foibles that happen. Well, the Campbell County Republican women absolutely agree with that. They think you should laugh at politics because it's funny. And so they've invited Kyle Mann from the Babylon Bee, and he's going to be in Gillette on April the 18th. If you want tickets to it, go to CampbellCountyRepublicanWomen.com. And it's going to be a fun time. Christine and I are going to try to make it. But if you want to laugh at politics, have a night out, and just enjoy yourself, that's the place to go. April 18th, Campbell County. And if you need tickets, go to CampbellCountyRepublicanWomen.com. So I want to begin with an op-ed that Governor Moonbeam Gordon has published in the Cow Pie. Of course, he doesn't send his op-eds to the Open Range Record because, you know, they already ditched an interview with us. But anyway, from the Cow Pie, the people of Wyoming spoke. Now, I'm not going to go through all of Governor Gordon's drivel because we've heard it all before. How fantastic he is, how great the budget that he put together was, how amazing it is that all of his people worked together and came over to his side. What I do want to point out for you, though, is that he has continued to go back to a tired old narrative, the one that was used, well, that has been used ever since the Freedom Caucus came onto the scene, and that is that they're not guided by Wyoming interests. Oh no. You see, it's DC insiders, DC overlords that are guiding the actions of all of the conservatives in the House, and that they're really not dealing with Wyoming issues. We'll talk about that in just a second. But here's what Governor Gordon said. Though passion may have strained, it must not break our bonds of affection. And even as national politics attempts to polarize us as a state, we must not let go of the Wyoming value of neighbor helping neighbor. My reminder to the legislature was and is heartfelt. We must not let divisiveness and national issues drive us to hate our neighbor. Wyoming is Wyoming. Okay, on and on and on. So where exactly in the legislative session were there national issues that were trying to make Wyoming people hate each other? You see, hate, words mean things, as Ken so appropriately said. Hate is a pretty strong word. And so, please, Governor Gordon, enlighten us as to what those bills were, what those pieces of legislation were exactly that were designed to make people hate each other. You see, this is the narrative that the left uses when it comes to conservatives. That we just don't care about people, we don't care about puppies, and we really don't like feeding children. That's the narrative that they use. And they do it to try to sew up discontent, with in your brain. You know, it's the same thing I was talking about when I started out the program, that the underlying premise behind all of this is that the left, the redcoats and the rhinos, good. Evil, conservative, Freedom Caucus, bad. Freedom Caucus makes you want to hate each other. So I would challenge the governor, exactly what pieces of legislation, exactly which legislators were trying to sow up hate and discontent. Now be specific here. Who exactly was trying to say you should hate this other group? The truth is, nobody was doing that. And as much as I despise the redcoats, I don't think that even they, well, I shouldn't say that because we did have a major disruption in the legislature. Now, wait a minute. Could that have been an attempt to sow hate and discontent? Well, you see, it was trumped up from the very beginning that it was a constitutionally protected act that happened on the floor of the House, that a Democrat took a picture, and then the media went hog wild. Now, how many things did the media report in that whole thing that weren't exactly true? They didn't really hit the nail on the head. They didn't really drive the point home where they should have. How many things can you come up with in your mind that the media pushed that absolutely wasn't true? Let me give you another topic. Let's talk about guns and the SEPA bill. Can you honestly say in all of the articles, and I've got one here in the stack of stuff, that were written about the SEPA bill that pretty much led you to believe that the conservatives pushing that piece of legislation just don't like law enforcement? Well, there were 23 sheriffs that paraded around the Capitol at various times. And I would say that was absolutely intimidation. Many of them stood in the gallery with their arms crossed, badges gleaming in the light, looking down from the gallery at all the legislators. Don't tell me that wasn't intimidation. And the media articles that were written and the commentators from Wildpile and Claire McFarland from the Cowboy and all of them. So who exactly is trying to drum up all of this hate and discontent, Governor? Well, it's not the conservatives. And I would say on the left, it's very few of them. I mean, they're incredibly misguided, and I think the results of their actions are absolutely detrimental to the state of Wyoming. I don't seriously think that all of them hate their opposition. Now, their policies may be in direct opposition to everything that conservatives stand for, but that doesn't mean that they hate one another. I was always told growing up that if you hate someone, it means you want them to die. I don't think that's true of any of them. Now there are some people in the legislature that they do believe that the ends justify the means, and they will use anybody and anything at their disposal to accomplish whatever their goal is. Definitely one of those is Carly Provenza. The other one definitely is Mike Yin. And I think, as affable and as cordial as he tries to be, he was the guy that sent up the trial balloon over this whole check incident. He's the guy they had out front doing it, bringing up the subject to see how it would be handled, to set the stage, as it were, for his partner in crime, or maybe partner in crime is the best way to put it, Carly Provenza, to take the second step the next day and to bring her motion to the floor, knowing that they weren't going to get gavelled down for doing it. So, that is absolutely an example of the ends justifying the means. To use people as a means to get to your goal, to use them as a tool to accomplish your political ends. And I mean, there are some people in the legislature that absolutely do act that way. But I don't think it's most. I don't think it's a majority. And I think that actually the people that I'm referring to are actually probably in the minority. But the governor doesn't want to cast it that way. You see, he's already given a tremendous amount of money, up $150,000, to his Prosperity and Commerce PAC, or PAC. What a stupid name for a political action committee. Well, he's already set up the stage for this election. And if you don't think the governor isn't going to be active, well, you're living on another planet, because he's very committed to the left taking back control of the Wyoming legislature. Now, that's not to say that it's not going to be a fight. Absolutely it will. But to use the words of my beautiful wife, the way that we change things in Wyoming is not with opinion. We change them with facts. And that's why it is so important that we report things accurately. Now, this program, it's an opinion show. I do give you some journalism from time to time, but most of it is opinion. But it is opinion backed up with facts on the ground. I try really hard to give you the information you need to go out and make the argument yourself. I promise you that if you walk into any room and you say, this is true because David says so, you're going to be laughed out of the room. Even though I'm right almost all of the time, you still need to be able to make the argument yourself, which is why I try really hard to give you the articles that I'm referencing, to give you the facts on the ground, to show you where to go to get your own information so that you can defend yourself against, the liberals and the people like Mark Gordon that just claim that conservatives hate their opponents. And that's not true at all. And again, it's pretty shocking that the governor of Wyoming, one of 50 governors in the entire country, writes an op-ed and says, well, these policies are designed to make you hate other people. And obviously, it's a veiled reference to the Freedom Caucus, if I ever saw one. But I think it's absolutely shocking that he's the one that actually did that. All right, so we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're a little bit ahead of schedule, but that's okay. But I need to take a quick break. And when we come back, I'm going to play the interview with U.S. Representative Hageman for you. So back in a minute. Yeah, I know. The weather seems to be toying with us. 60 one day, 42 the next, and pretty soon, my friends, those 6s and 4s are going to turn into 3s and 2s. Though we all want to avoid it, that white stuff is coming, my friends, and you will be shoveling the walk in it. It's cold, it's unpleasant, and nobody likes to do it. But you could make it just a little bit more comfortable and prevent your feet from turning into a giant block of ice. In fact, you could keep them nice and warm and toasty, and your toes will never even know that they're outside. The rest of you may be frozen solid, but at least your feet won't be. To make all this happen, you just need a pair of socks from the Buffalo Wool Company. They are the finest socks that I've ever put on my feet. To get you a pair, go to their website, thebuffalowoolco.com. Trust me, you won't be disappointed. Are you one of those guys that listen to the president just a little bit too closely and now you're tired of winning? Are you getting the feeling that there's been way too many good things happening in our country and you just can't take it anymore? Well, if you are, and you think you should follow Rosie O'Donnell's example and get the heck out of Dodge, you need to call Rebecca Bextel at eXp Realty. She'll make those foreign country living ideas a reality for you. All you have to do is call 307-699-3519, and she'll make sure some freedom-loving, red-blooded American will now live in the home that you no longer want. If you want to sell your house, or if you want to buy one that's way better than the house you have right now, give Rebecca a call. Again, her phone number is 307-699-3519.
I've never felt the freedom like I do. I feel stronger every day, don't you? Well, I can show you how. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. I've never felt the freedom like I do. I feel stronger every day. I'm only gonna get stronger.
Cowboy State Politics is only going to get stronger. This program is only going to continue to expand. The Cowboy State Politics Podcast, Cowboy State Politics Live, the open range record. Man, I am a busy guy. Welcome back to the program, my friends. Cowboy State Politics Live on a Thursday. I've got a lot of comments. Thank you for watching the show. I mean, keep them coming. I love looking at them during the show, though. You know, when we're in the other studio, it's kind of hard for me to respond to comments because I can't see them. Agent 29 is in control of all of that. Just one comment, you know, and let me just reiterate what I said before the break. Are there some Democrats and redcoats that hate us? Yes, there are. There are some that absolutely want to see us destroyed, and without a doubt, that's true. But it is not all of them. It's probably not even a majority. Now, while we may completely disagree with everything that the other side says, it doesn't mean that there aren't well-meaning people on the other side that are just incredibly misguided. Now, it may mean that they're right in line with the other people, but I don't think that everybody on the other side hates conservatives. I think there are some. I don't think it's a majority. I think there's a bunch of people that are absolutely incredibly misguided. That is 100% true. But to say that they hate all of us, that's a bit of a stretch. Remember, as Agent 29 said, words mean things. And so we have to be very careful when we're characterizing an entire group of people. You know, that's a pretty big group. So it is more accurate to say some of them hate us. And that is absolutely true. All right, my friends, last Thursday, on my way back from the Middle Swamp, I stopped in Wheatland where Representative Hageman was having a town hall. And I got to sit down with her for, I think it was 17 minutes. But I put the video together for you this morning, and I'm going to go ahead and play it for you. We talked about a couple of different things. Water. We don't really talk about that too much on the program, but I asked Harriet about it, considering that we are in the middle of a drought. So anyway, here is my discussion with U.S. Representative Harriet Hageman from last Thursday. Here you go. The lady I'm joined by, needs no introduction, but I'll do it anyway. I'm joined by U.S. Representative Harriet Hageman. Harriet,
Hi,
welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. We get to do it in person today.
I know. I've been waiting so long. Usually we talk on the phone, so
Yes,
this is
we do.
great. So we don't have a lot of time because you're about to do a town hall here in Wheatland. But there are a couple of things that I wanted to talk to you about. One of which is water.
Yes.
And, you know, we are, I guess the best way to describe it is that we're pretty much in the middle of a drought.
Yes, we are.
And
It is shaping up to be a very severe drought this winter.
And, you know, I mean, there hasn't been hardly any snow. I know
No.
you look at the mountains above Buffalo and Sheridan, and there's really anything there. So my question is there anything that you're working on in Washington, D.C. with the Colorado River Compact, the Nebraska Compact? I mean, is there anything that is being done to help out Wyoming citizens with water?
So not directly. The Colorado River Compact, where that is right now is the states and the federal government, the Department of Interior, have been negotiating basically a water plan to move forward. As your listeners may know, there is a 1922 compact, and then there's, I think, 15 or 17 other documents that are essentially called the Law of the River that govern the Colorado River, with the headwaters being in Wyoming on the Green River. We have, you have the entire compact for all of the basin states, and then you have the upper basin states that also entered into a separate compact. Wyoming is entitled to 14% of what was appropriated to the upper basin states, which according to the 1922 compact, essentially they split 15 million acre feet between the upper basin and the lower basin. The viewpoint is that when they set those numbers in the early 1920s, that was probably a relatively wet period of time, and that the Colorado River doesn't typically or on average run 15 million acre feet. So they kind of hardwired in an agreement that was based upon hydrology that really hasn't played out over time. So that's one of the challenges that has existed. Another challenge that has existed is that you have the downstream states are where you have such enormous municipalities. That's where the political drivers are. So, but the problem is that they have not constructed the water infrastructure that they need in those states to meet their water demands. And I'll give you an example. In California, they have the same water infrastructure in place today with 40 million people that they had in the 1960s with 16 million people.
Holy cow.
So they're continuously looking at the Colorado River as kind of the save-all for them, and it isn't. It can't be. It's not even if it ran 15 million acre feet and we could deliver 7.5 million acre feet at least every year on average, that isn't enough to meet the demand that they have in the state of California. So one of the things that I have been doing as the chairman of the Water, Wildlife, and Fisheries subcommittee is consistently pushing the state of California that they're going to have to develop additional water supplies, both through the construction of desalination plants, as well as the expansion of some of their existing reservoirs, such as Shasta, as well as the construction of new reservoirs. But they just don't have the political will to do it. They also will not contribute any money. So when they come to the federal government for money, my first question is, what is California putting into this?
Right.
California needs to be putting money into this. Then you have the dynamics of Phoenix, the same thing. But what you're seeing in California is essentially they're drying up their farm ground to transfer ag water, irrigation water for municipal use. And I think that it's absolutely a fool's errand to do that.
Oh, yeah, I think that's a giant mistake. All right.
The North Platte Decree, the decree is what it is. You know, it was initially entered in 1945 and then it was modified in 2001. You have both the decree and then you have the Platte River Program as well that has to do with the endangered and threatened species in central Nebraska and in eastern Nebraska. So that is the law of the river for the North Platte River. I am terribly, terribly worried about this upcoming water year that will start on May 1st. I'm terribly worried about it because we don't have the historical snowpack that we have. Now, 2012 was one of the very worst years that we've ever had in the North Platte River system. Well, and throughout the entirety of Wyoming. You know what, by Worland, in 2012, I believe that Worland received 2.2 inches of precipitation in an entire year.
Holy cow.
So that tells you how bad 2012 was. So we've lived through some of this before, but I wish that I could tell you what we have in storage right now in the North Platte River system in Pathfinder, a reservoir, for example. I don't know those numbers off the top of my head right now, but I have been reading some of the reports that it's kind of dire.
A little bit, yeah.
You know, we need snow and rain. March is typically a pretty wet month, but you and I blew here today with those horrific winds. And
that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, you know, you're watching the topsoil on those fields blow across the highways.
Yeah, that was incredible. You know, and I was trying to keep the car on the road and take a picture at the same time, just to be able to show everybody what I was seeing. So let's talk about what seems to be a perennial subject with us, bears.
Bears.
So where
We're
are we
still
at with the
working.
grizzly?
So as you know, I have introduced a bill to delist the grizzly bear, and we are pushing Steve Scalise, who's the majority floor leader, to bring that bill to the floor. But before I do that, I also am hoping to spend the next couple of weeks going to various members' offices and making sure that I have the support of the Republican caucus to delist the grizzly bears. At the same time, we know that the Fish and Wildlife Service is also moving forward to delist the grizzly. They're not doing it as fast as I would like them to. I think that they've put the decision off until later this year. I don't know all of the reasons why they have made that decision. We clearly have met and exceeded by over double the recovery goals for the grizzly bear. The grizzly bear has been recovered now for almost 3 decades. And really, you know, it is a terrible mistake, in my opinion, to manage just one for the benefit of one species at the expense of all others, especially when it's an apex predator.
Oh, yeah.
So, you know, and the Game and Fish Department has done a phenomenal job. The state of Wyoming has invested over $50 million in grizzly recovery. We have 9 people in the Game and Fish Department that are dedicated to working on grizzly issues. So we're the ones that are the success story here, not the Fish and Wildlife Service. And it's time to allow the Game and Fish Department to actually manage that species in conjunction with other species.
There's 2 other topics I want to talk to you about from national politics, and then I want to ask you about your race. Okay. The first one is around the DHS funding. We know that it's held up in Congress right now. And, you know, Wyoming is recently, we've been seeing some of the effects of illegal immigrants on our roads.
Oh, no doubt.
I-80, I-90.
No doubt.
So talk to me about what's happening in the House surrounding illegal immigration, and how do you think that's going to play out in the Senate?
So, as you know, we invested substantial funds in terms of the ICE and Border Patrol in our one big beautiful bill,
Right.
The reconciliation package that we did in July. So we are spending money on building the wall. We're doing more enforcement, as everyone has seen on TV over the last couple of months. We know that there are literally hundreds of thousands of people that have now left the United States as a result of those enforcement efforts, both in terms of the deportations as well as the voluntary, those that are voluntarily leaving. It is insane to me, in light of what's going on in the Middle East, and we do know that there are sleeper cells here in the United States, in large part because the Biden open borders over the last 4 years. It is insane that the Democrats are holding up the funding for the Department of Homeland Security. The primary agencies that are being affected by that are TSA, FEMA, and the Coast Guard. I think the Coast Guard is a very significant one
Right
when
now?
it comes to,
Yeah.
at these issues right now. But those are the agencies that are right now, people are not being paid. And I think that that is just absolute insanity. But the Democrats do not seem like they're budging. When I watched TV this morning and listened to Chuck Schumer and others, they don't seem that they are budging. And so we'll see what happens with that. But you bring up a very important issue, and I'll talk about it more today during the town hall, the trucking issue and trying to make sure that we're getting
huge.
illegals. It's huge. It is absolutely huge. Just as one metric, there are 13,000 vehicles that travel I-80 every single day. 50% of those are trucks. The state of Wyoming has the highest truck fatality rate in the United States.
Wow.
So it is very important to the state of Wyoming that we have these enforcement actions. The sheriff in Laramie County has done 2 of them now. And this last one, they pulled over 100 trucks and they found 32 illegals and people who could not speak English.
32 out of
32
100.
out of 100, one third on our
Holy
roads.
cow.
1/3 on our roads.
Well, and I don't think that many people were aware of it until Sheriff Kozak started, enforcement efforts in Laramie County. And then it was a giant shock. It was one of those things like, well, this doesn't happen in Wyoming. Well, found out that it does.
Well, and it's become so dangerous because these, and I'll talk more about this during the town hall as well, chameleon truck drivers, chameleon truckers, they're responsible for many of these accidents. And these are fly-by-night trucking companies that do, they get into an accident or something, they just slap a new DOT number, change the name of their company and keep driving. They may even lose their licenses or lose their ability to have a DOT number, and they're just cycling them through. That accident that happened in northern Indiana about a month ago that killed the 4 Amish gentlemen, that was an illegal from Kyrgyzstan driving for a chameleon trucking company that was owned by a Muslim from Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Holy cow. All right, the last topic I'd like to ask you about for national politics is the SAVE Act.
Yes.
Okay? It just looks from my perspective that John Thune is doing nothing.
The Save America Act.
Yeah.
Okay.
The Save America Act, excuse me.
Because I have a SAFE Act too.
Right. So tell my listeners where we're at with that, because I get a lot of feedback on this.
So I don't know if John Thune is the one to blame for that, and the reason
Okay.
that I say it is Lisa Murkowski came out this week, and she's not in support of it. So the question becomes, between her and Mitch McConnell, could they crater any effort to try to bring that to the floor, even if you did it with a talking filibuster? The other risk that you run on that is that there will be a substantial number of amendments that they will be bringing to the floor during whatever filibuster, if they were to go that route. So I know people want it. I understand it. I have listened to Mike Lee speak. I think he does a phenomenal job, a very eloquent way of explaining how this could work. But I'm not sure that all of the Republicans in the Senate are on board with moving forward with the Save America Act. And if they are not, I don't know if they can succeed with it. And that's the fear.
Well, isn't that amazing that it's not the Democrats generally? I mean, yeah, we have to worry about the Democrats as we saw in our own session, but a lot of the time it's Republicans that we
In
have to
this
worry about.
circumstance, that's my understanding of what may be happening.
Okay, last question. You're running for the U.S. Senate.
Yes, I am.
So I haven't seen any, well, I've seen a couple of people say that they're thinking about running. So talk to me about how your race is going, and if you could, just try to explain why you chose the Senate and perhaps not some other races.
So I think that the race is going very well from the standpoint of our polling shows that everything is going well. And I am focusing on continuing to represent Wyoming in the U.S. House of Representatives. And I think my ability to do a good job of that reflects well on whether I should be elevated to a United States Senator, I guess is, is the way that I would put the way that I would put it. So I just did another interview and I was asked the question of how do you balance between what you do in Washington, D.C. and representing Wyoming. And I said, well, it's not really a balance. Everything that I do is on behalf of the state of Wyoming. Whether I am here in Wyoming or I'm in Washington, D.C., that's always at the forefront of my mind in terms of any policy decision that I make. So I have been traveling the state just this week. Just over the last 3 days, I will do another 1,000 miles around the state of Wyoming, having meetings, having town halls, touring various businesses and engaging on all different kinds of issues. So I will continue doing just exactly what I did when I ran for the U.S. House of Representatives. That's what I'm going to do running for the United States Senate. I chose the United States Senate rather than some of the other races. As you know, Cynthia Lummis is retiring, and I believe that I bring a rather unique skill set to that body. There's some great people in the U.S. Senate. I'm kind of sad that we're going to be losing Mark Wayne Mullen because he's a good one. I really like him. But, the background that I have, my background being a water, natural resource, constitutional attorney, dealing with administrative agencies for the last several decades, there really isn't anybody in the Senate that has that kind of skill set, that has the history that I have. And that's what I think has been very useful to me in the House of Representatives, really exposing the administrative state and what we need to do as the Article 1 legislative making body to take back our power so that we are actually representing the citizens of this great country. I want to take that same philosophy over to the Senate and start getting some more people engaged with the idea in that body of why we need to make sure that the Senate is actually functioning as it was intended to function. A lot of the stuff that we do in the House, we pass a lot of bills, they go to the Senate and they die.
Same thing happens here.
Well, and that's why I think that it is important to have somebody who came from the House to go to that body with that experience, but also to really focus and try to focus them on what I think are the critical things we need to do for this country, especially in the administrative state and reigning in the federal government.
Well, I know there's a lot of people that are interested in your old seat, or I guess the seat that you have now. So we'll see how it works out.
Yeah.
But thank you very much, Harriet. I know you've got a town hall to do, and I just really appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks, David. Thanks for coming today.
Of course. Wouldn't miss it.
Well, there you have it. There's the interview with Representative Harriet Hageman. I think it went pretty well. And, one of the things that shocked me in talking with her this time is the amount of trucking problems that we have on Wyoming interstates. It's truly incredible. And if you heard the statistic that she mentioned, 1/3 of everybody that Sheriff Kozak, and we can talk about him, in his stupid investigation, but 1/3 of the people that he pulled over in his little sting were illegal immigrants. 1/3. So 38 out of 100 were absolutely illegal. So we do have a problem. And, this is a great example of why the governor is wrong when he says, we have to have Wyoming solutions for Wyoming problems. This really isn't a Wyoming problem. That's bullcrap. Things that happen in other states are happening here. Now, they might not be to the degree, and it's just because we have a smaller population, but they're still happening here. And to say that Wyoming is disconnected from what happens in the rest of the country is truly pretty naive when you think about it. And it's, it is short-sighted politicians that are only interested in getting reelected. And, the reason I led today's program with Governor Gordon is that he is one of those people that says, well, those are national issues. Those don't really affect anybody in Wyoming. Well, that's a load of crap. Or as Lloyd Larson would say,
horse crap.
I mean, it's anytime you hear that phrase come out of a politician's mouth, you need to get him to explain why. Remember, words mean things. Maybe that should be the title of today's episode. No, Ken, it's not an homage to you. Just kidding. But, it's get the politicians to explain what it is that they're meaning. Say, all right, so you say that this isn't a Wyoming problem, but there's a couple of examples, that are happening in this state. Please explain to me why this isn't happening here. This is what we heard with the when we first brought up the topic of the pornography books in the schools. Pretty much every media outlet in Wyoming printed an article, this really isn't happening in Wyoming. The Wyoming Education, one of my favorite sound bites is from Grady Hutcherson of the Wyoming Education Association. He says, this just doesn't happen here. That isn't a Wyoming problem. We have a great education system here. Yeah, yeah, but you also have libraries that have a bunch of porn in them. So let's just be honest about where we're at. So anytime you hear a politician say, well, this isn't happening in Wyoming, you better press them on it, because that is just a throwaway line that they use to try to attack the Freedom Caucus and other conservatives. Because really, and here's one of the amazing things I've learned with the Open Range Record. Now, our mission is to publish the news. And we try really hard in it, and you might find this hard to believe, but it's pretty easy to find somebody that will write their opinion, send in an opinion piece, an op-ed. It is a lot harder to find somebody that will just write news. And what we've found is that if you just report the facts, if you just report the news the way it's supposed to be, you're going to be labeled as a conservative outlet, even though you're just reporting the facts. And it is because the left, the redcoats in this country, the redcoats in this state, they don't operate on facts. It's all feelings for them. And so, if you ever wonder how they're able to lie, and I hear all the time, oh man, I wonder how they sleep at night. Well, they sleep just fine, because they have a different way of looking at the world, and everything with them is feelings. That there is no objective truth for them, and everything is situational ethics. And you might ask them one day what do they think of a topic, and then the very same question the next day, and you'll get a different answer, because it's all feelings with them. But like I said earlier, as the lovely Christine so poignantly said, we don't change people. We don't change the world with opinions. We change the world with facts, and we all need to remember that. And it's actually a pretty incredible thing. Now, a guy that let's see here, how much time? Oh yeah, we got enough time to do this one. So a guy that really has trouble controlling his feelings is Reed Reisner. Now, yesterday, and this has been all over social media, so you've probably seen it. But he has now sued 3 more people for defamation, 2 of which, well, I think maybe all 3 of them are in Casper. But in a really underhanded move, one of the people kind of tangentially involved called it a sleazy move, is he had Dan Sabrowski served during a bar none city council meeting. The process server walked right into the meeting, right up to the podium, and said, this is a time for public comments, and so I've got this lawsuit to serve. And he did it right in the middle of a public meeting. And I mean, incredible. And when he was pressed on it, they said, well, why did you serve him in the meeting? Why couldn't you wait till after the meeting or before the meeting? And the process server said he had specific instructions to serve it to him there in the meeting at the specific time. And when asked where the instructions came from, it was from the law firm. So there's a piece in the Cowboy entitled U.S. House Candidate Reed Reisner Sues 3 More People for Defamation. And I quote, U.S. House candidate and Casper businessman Reed Reisner has sued 3 more people for defamation. One of the persons said she's not afraid of him and bring it on. That's Michelle St. Louis. Reisner said the 3 Natrona County residents have made salacious claims about him. That's in addition to his July 2025 defamation lawsuit against Anthony Bouchard, a Republican who represented parts of Laramie and Platte counties. Reisner accused Bouchard of defaming him on social media by claiming Reisner had, quote, a sexual abuse record while working for Casper College. The college has since said it received no complaints of misconduct against Reisner, and a judge said in November that Reisner's defamation case had at least enough legal coherence to overcome Bouchard's motion for dismissal. On Friday, Reisner sued bar none resident Dan Sabrowski and Sabrowski's ex-wife, Michelle St. Louis, claiming they waged a social media and whisper campaign against him that has harmed his business and repelled some of his clients. And in February, Reisner sued former state legislator Austin Kit Jennings, also on defamation claims. St. Louis voiced surprise Wednesday morning in a phone interview with the Cowboy, during which she learned Reisner is suing her. She said she's not afraid of that Reisner, and he can bring it on. Quote, as somebody who's running to represent all citizens in the state of Wyoming in the U.S. Congress, how is it that he cannot see the line between free speech and defamation, asked Lewis. Michael Blevins, spokesman for Reisner, wrote in a text message, quote, these people have come after Reed for years and defamed him. He has every right to hold them accountable and pursue all legal means. Well, we'll see how that whole thing pans out. But here's what I know about Reed Reisner. I believe it was last summer that he sent several people in Casper a cease and desist letter, and he accused them of using his intellectual property, namely his face, in social media posts. Now, included in the in the cease and desist letter was my company logo, or a graphic that Reed Reisner had used that looks suspiciously like this. So I called the law firm that sent the cease and desist letter, and I just asked them. So I would like to know why my company logo is contained in your cease and desist letter. And the guy says, "Oh no, Reed Reisner, he came up with that." And I calmly replied, "If you're sitting at your computer, I would like you to Google Cowboy state politics and see how many of these you find when you Google that." And he did. And I said, look, man, I don't want to cause any trouble. I just want you to take my company logo out of your business and don't ever put it in there again. Now, I did follow up, and allegedly that happened. So that's what I know. But here's the thing, right? If you're running for office and, you know, your response to criticism. Now, I'll admit that the criticism that has been leveled at Reed Reisner, that's some pretty serious stuff. You know, any sort of when you get into like sexual abuse allegations and all that, I mean, that's not. There's a big difference between being mentioned on Cowboy state politics and having that accusation lobbed. And to be clear, I don't know if any of that's true or not. I really don't know anything about it. Heard a lot of rumors, but as far as I don't know if there's any truth to it at all, which is why you haven't heard me report on it. Which, you know, like I operate on facts, and when I got facts, I form my own opinions. And as far as I'm concerned, don't really have any facts in that situation yet. So not even going to weigh in on it. But if you are a candidate for public office and your response to criticism, whatever criticism it is to send cease and desist letters to those people who criticize you, I don't know if that's a very good campaign strategy. I don't know it at all. Maybe you should stand up and make the case to Wyoming citizens why they should elect you instead of firing off cease and desist letters for our social media posts. Trust me, there have been a lot of posts about me on social media too. And that's part of being a public figure. You're going to have criticism. And, you know, it doesn't matter like which elected official or public figure you are, there's going to be somebody on Facebook that doesn't like you. And they're probably going to post a whole bunch of terrible stuff about you. Well, it's how you handle it that helps to determine if you are a good candidate or not. And if you can deftly handle criticism like some people do when they're on the Cowboy, well, that says a lot about the quality of your potential service. Can you weather criticism? Can you answer criticism? Well, I don't know that responding with a cease and desist letter is really handling criticism at all, especially when you're trying to tell somebody they can't use their First Amendment right. So I'll keep following this. I'll tell you what happens with all the lawsuits. You're going to hear Michelle St. Louis's name come up in a little bit later on in the program, because it's, well, let's just say that she's stuck her nose in somebody else's business too. But I've got an article on that a little bit later on. So let's go ahead and take another break. And when we come back, we'll continue with the program. We've got lots more coming on the program. A couple of great stories. Stick with me, and we'll be back in a minute. Are you tired of all the meaningless political drivel floating around right now? Endless commentary that really doesn't have anything backing it up? Do you long for the days of true investigative journalism coming from an authoritative source who really doesn't care how popular and apparently good-looking a politician is? Fortunately for you, that's what I do on Cowboy State Politics. New episodes are published every Monday, Wednesday, and Saturday, and you can get them anywhere that you get your podcasts. iHeartRadio, iTunes, TuneIn, really any of them will work. But the easiest way is just to go to the website, cowboystatepolitics.com. There, you can find all of the shows, as well as any of the articles I might bring up during the course of the program. Cowboy State Politics Live, the program you're listening to right now, is broadcast every Tuesday through Friday, beginning at 8 a.m. Pay attention to all of that other block-headed nonsense if you want. Just make sure that you don't miss an episode of Cowboy State Politics. And now, back to our program. Welcome back to the program, Cowboy State Politics Live. I'm David Iverson, the Wyoming's big voice on the right. A Wyoming Tribune Eagle editorial. Response to the check scandal says a lot about Wyoming legislators. Now, I'm not really going to go into the too much into the meat of this editorial because there's not a lot there. However, one or two little lines did catch my attention. Now, if you go to this piece on the Wyoming Tribune Eagle, the turkey vulture, at the bottom of the article, you will find this comment, and I quote, "Correction. A paragraph in this editorial about Representative Provenza providing the photograph to the media has been modified to avoid inferring that she violated a joint rule of the legislature by doing so." She actually did. Because Joint Rule 22.1 says that she was to do the exact opposite of what she did. Jeremy Harrelson on the Cow Pie yesterday went into great detail how she didn't follow Joint Rule 22-1. There's a lengthy piece on the Open Range Record with screenshots of Rule 22.1, how Carly Provenza did violate Rule 22.1. Now, Mike Yin has been on his stupid social media platform going on and on about how the Open Range Record published a false and misleading article. There's nothing false about it. It's well documented, it's very specific, and it clearly points to the rules that he and Carly Provenza violated. Now, I don't really care what the Legislative Investigative Committee found. They weren't really dealing with facts. That's politics. And what they actually said is that no legislative misconduct happened. Now, that's their opinion. That doesn't mean that they didn't violate a rule, and it's the legislature's determination if violating that rule is legislative misconduct. So let's be very, very clear about what we're talking about here, Carly, the turkey vulture, and Mike Yin. Just because a political body who deals in politics every single day has a different interpretation of the events does not mean that those are facts. Now, Mike Yin, you're welcome to come on this program anytime you'd like. You know that. You've been on the show before. And we can debate this ad nauseum, though I don't really want to. But you're welcome to come on here and plead your case. Provenza, I seriously doubt that you'll come on the program, since the first time you were here, you just snarled at me for an hour and a half, or for however long they were on the show. I think it was an hour. But the point is, just because a political body has an interpretation of events, that doesn't make it a fact. That's their interpretation, as is your post on your social media platform. Now, let me just read you a couple lines out of this ridiculous editorial, and I quote, "Some have said it's much ado about nothing," quoting now, "little more than bad judgment and worse optics. Others will tell you it's one of the most embarrassing stains on the reputation of the Wyoming legislature in decades." I don't know. There's been a lot of embarrassing situations. Like, I don't know, Steve Harshman, really going after Chuck Gray on a hot mic, in which he used a homophobic slur that's really nasty, and he dropped the F-bomb a couple times. That's a pretty bad stain, too. And Barlow's response to it, taking away his computer privileges for 2 days, yeah, that's, I don't know, that's kind of embarrassing. What about an elected representative, Dan Zwanamander, who moved out of his legislative district and then gerrymandered his new house into his old district? That's kind of a scandal, especially when we had him dead to rights. Oh yeah, and there was that little instance of voter fraud, which he absolutely committed. You know, I have to tell you, my friends, if you go back in the Cowboy state politics archives, we had that guy, to use Chuck Schumer's phrase, 6 ways to Sunday. I had pictures of the inside of his house from a realty website. Obviously, I mean, very, very, very empty. So there have been a lot of things that have happened in the Wyoming legislature, but a constitutionally protected exercise of free speech is not one of them. Now, the response to it may have been embarrassing. What the media did, that's certainly embarrassing, and I expect that they'll get their just desserts out of that one. I can't wait until that day happens. But I don't know if this is the most embarrassing stain on the Wyoming legislature in decades. I don't really think that's the case. Continuing, quote, regardless of where you land on the spectrum, we believe the way lawmakers have responded to the public disclosure of Teton County woman handing out campaign checks on the floor of the House of Representatives is more important than the initial scandal. I don't really think it is. And let me ask you this. Do you think that the guys that wrote the rules, Mike Yin, for example, Mike Yin's a smart guy. Now, I disagree with him almost entirely, and I'm pretty ticked off at his social media page. But he's a smart guy. He helped write most of the rules, at least the joint rules. He's been on the rules committee for a long time. Do you think that he just didn't think about campaign financing? Do you suppose that slipped his mind? Do you suppose that the people that wrote the Wyoming Constitution didn't even think that perhaps maybe politicians would collect money so that they could run for office? Do you suppose that they just stupefyingly avoided that? That's a ridiculous assumption. Of course they didn't. There are rules governing just about everything in the House of Representatives and in the Wyoming Senate, even down to the clothes you can wear, the kind of tie you can wear. You could even demand a spittoon on the floor if you want. So taking all of those rules into consideration, don't you find it a little bit odd that they didn't even address campaign financing? Of course they didn't, because it's constitutionally protected free speech. Now, maybe wrong place, wrong time, but there's no rules against it. There's no laws against it. They weren't in session. And my pal Rebecca is a Wyoming citizen. And so let's just talk about facts here. Let's call things as they are. Let's see here. But the turkey vulture continues. But all of us agree. Now, I don't know if we all agree on this, but they say all of us agree distributing and receiving campaign donations on the House floor was bad judgment. I don't know if it was or not. I'm sure that it has happened many, many, many times in the past. Now, it just so happens this is the first time a Democrat snapped a picture. But let me ask you this. If indeed it wasn't a check, let's say if it was a note, maybe it was a thank you card, just if it was anything else, would Carly Provenza have snapped that picture? Yes, she would have. Would she have attempted to make a scandal out of it? Yes, she would have. Absolutely. It just would have been done in different language. So let's not dig too deep into this and, exonerate anybody, Mike Yin, because you're the one that floated the trial balloon. And let's be honest, you helped write 22-1, so you know what you did was wrong. Now, whether or not it was legislative misconduct, well, that's a political matter for the legislature. That's not a question of facts. But let's see here. Here's what they say about Mike Yin. The public, quote, airing of dirty laundry, end quote, started with a vague reference to the situation by Mike Yin of Jackson during debate on a bill supported by Ms. Vextel. It became a full-blown stain on... Now, remember, this is an editorial. So what an editorial is that's the position of the paper, right? So when the editor of a paper, so me, for the Open Range Record, for example, when I write an editorial, that means that's the paper's position. The people that run the outfit, the people that are behind all of the decisions. This is their position. Let's see. And there was one other point here. Let me just read you the last two paragraphs. This is kind of the meat of it. Quote, those are necessary actions. That is what they did in the whole check thing, given the current circumstances, but it shouldn't have been necessary. As Senator Tara Slithers Nethercott posted on her Facebook page February 13th, when she didn't have any of the facts of it, and by the way, was spreading a whole bunch of rumors throughout the Capitol, but we can talk about those a little bit later. Quote, the integrity of our legislative process depends on the public's confidence that decisions are made on the merits, grounded in the law, the facts, and the best interests of the Wyoming people, not influenced by the timing of political donations. So now it's about timing, right? She's insinuating bribery just because of the time frame. Now, their super special investigative committee determined that there was no bribery. They determined that there was nobody was at fault there. So let me ask you this. If Carly Provenza and Mike Yin can claim that they were exonerated from this whole thing, that there was no legislative misconduct, it also follows that the other people that were exonerated by the Special Investigative Committee are also free of any blame. But do you see the double standard here? It's okay for the Democrats. They were exonerated. But when other people are said to have committed nothing wrong, well, they are not exonerated. You see, we have to hold them accountable. But it's a giant double standard, and it's one that the media refuses to recognize. That, in fact, what is good for the goose is not good for the gander when it comes to the Democrats and the media. And that the Wyoming Tribune-Eagle, the Cowboy, any of the others, Wildfire, all of the other people that were involved in this whole thing, that they refuse to recognize the double standard that is at play, tells you that all of these media outlets, including this pile of garbage, are absolutely not being objective, nor have they ever been. Moving on. Next in the stack of stuff from Breitbart News. Now this one is particularly interesting to me. A bit of national news, if you will. From the Postmaster General. The U.S. Postal Service, it says USPS, will run out of money in 12 months. So wait a minute. They're going to be broke in 12 months? Well, the truth is they've been operating at a deficit for a really long time. Why is it, and this is a great discussion to have, why is it that a private company that pretty much does the exact same thing, and you can get stuff delivered overnight, when you send stuff through the post office, it could take a week or more. Why is it that they can operate pretty much doing the exact same thing, deliver stuff overnight, and turn a profit, and the U.S. Post Office can't? Interesting question. Keep it in mind as we go on here. And I quote from Breitbart. Postmaster General David Steiner told Congress that the U.S. Post Service would be out of money in less than a year if changes weren't made to boost revenue. During a hearing Tuesday, Steiner and members of the House Oversight Subcommittee on Government Operations appeared divided on how best to avoid a full stoppage in mail service in 12 months' time. Steiner asked lawmakers to allow him to borrow more money to cover costs, as well as to increase the price of the U.S. first-class stamp from 78 cents to 95 cents. He said, the cost to mail a single letter in the U.S. is the lowest in the industrialized world. Well, then why then do you have to keep continually... Man, I've got the hiccups today. Why do you have to continually jack up the price of stamps? I mean, if indeed is the lowest price, and if indeed you are running an efficient operation, why do you have to keep increasing prices? Quote, compare it to France at almost $3 a letter and England at $2.50. And the longest distance those letters have to travel is about 600 miles, that's smaller than the state of Texas, he told lawmakers. We deliver from the tip of Puerto Rico to the tip of Alaska for 78 cents. That's a distance of 5,000 miles. He said if the U.S. Post Service increased first-class stamp cost to 95 cents, it would, quote, largely solve our controllable loss while still remaining the lowest price stamp in the industrialized world. Subcommittee Chairman Pete Sessions told Steiner he's against increasing the cost of postage to nearly $1. Quote, it's going to come down to the 3 or 4 of us who are going to have to make some tough decisions that we can look at other people and say, that's the problem. The Postmaster General laid it on our doorstep, and we're not going to kick the can down the road. What if, let me just hypothesize for just a second here. What if the problem that is identified by the Postmaster General is not one of a lack of revenue, that perhaps it is a bloat of overhead? Perhaps the entire operation has been completely mishandled for decades. Maybe there's too many people. Maybe it's not so efficient. Maybe, just maybe, you've been negotiating contracts with unions that pay postal workers an exorbitant amount of money. Perhaps when you get public employee unions involved in the operation of what should be a profitable venture, your expenses are going to go up, and you're probably going to be operating in the red. The truth is that the history of the post office and their interaction with unions has been one of sucking taxpayers dry. There is no reason why the Post Service should be going broke, but they have been for a very, very long time. And I go back to my initial question. How is it that a private company can do pretty much the same thing and do it better and make money and turn a profit? How can they do that and the U.S. Postal Service can't? I'll tell you why. If you want something screwed up, get the government involved. That's why it won't work, because you create a giant bureaucracy that sometimes, most times, has to justify its own existence. When you have giant amounts of administration at the top running something that should be a profitable venture, it is never going to work. That's why government doesn't really have any business in the private sector. Now, I understand the post office has been around for a very, very long time. In fact, you can probably blame, and this is one historical curiosity, but the whole, well, it's a historical lie that Thomas Jefferson fathered some children with one of his slaves, Sally Hemings. The reason I say it's a lie is there's absolutely no proof to it whatsoever. The way that you prove paternity is, or a line, is you have to have a male heir. Thomas Jefferson didn't have any male heirs. And so the only thing that you can determine from that is somebody in Thomas Jefferson's family fathered some children with Sally Hemings. Now, there have been lots of books written as to how that's absolutely true. The Smithsonian, I've seen the exhibit myself. The Smithsonian claims that it's absolutely true. But that lie was started by a guy who wanted to be the Postmaster General, or he wanted to be the postmaster of a post office. And he owed Thomas Jefferson a tremendous amount of money. And so Thomas Jefferson said, no, we're not going to do that. I'm not going to make you the postmaster of this post office because you owe me a whole bunch of money and you've never attempted to pay me back. Go look at the history of it. It's a fascinating story. The guy that made it up was a pamphleteer, and he wanted to become the postmaster because he thought it would increase his status in the community. A couple of different accounts that I've read is that he was sweet on a girl, and he thought that if he was the postmaster, that maybe she'd go out with him. But when Thomas Jefferson said no, he published this pamphlet claiming that Jefferson had fathered some kids with Sally Hemings, and now most schools teach that as a fact, when in truth you can't prove it either way. Not saying it didn't happen. I'm saying you can't prove it. And we have to deal with facts, my friends, which is something that history books, Democrats, and redcoats have a real hard time with. From Breitbart, there was a whole bunch of really good pieces on there this morning when you can sift through, all of the, all the other, international stuff that's going on, the war in Iran. And I do have a piece in the stack of stuff about it, but, kind of bored talking about it. So I thought we'd move on to some other stuff today. But from Breitbart, the tariff inflation dog that didn't bite. Now, this is the reason I picked this was more for the title and less about the content of it. But we'll just go to the opening paragraphs and then I'll tell you what caught my attention. Quote, the inflation hawks had a simple theory that tariffs meant price hikes. Importers would pass costs to consumers. Domestic producers, shielded from foreign competition, would raise prices too. Democrats insisted on calling the tariffs a national sales tax. February's Consumer Price Index and the Producer Price Index, the CPI and PPI, respectively, the last clean read before the Supreme Court's ruling on the tariffs wiped the Liberation Day tariff regime off the books, showed neither had happened. It was a dog that didn't bite. And now I'm sure that you saw all of the media reports that Trump's tariffs were going to increase inflation, that we're going to have inflation out the roof, and that nobody was going to be able to control it. Well, first, that wasn't true on face, because inflation is not caused by tariffs. Inflation literally is money printing. What happens is the government prints a whole bunch of money and it devalues the currency. That is, it makes your dollar worth less because there is more money in the system. And let me just quickly explain this to you. Let's say that you have 5 apples, juicy, delicious looking apples. And I come to you and I say, those apples look pretty good. Can I have one? And you say, ooh, see, I only have 5. And that one apple, that represents 20% of my supply. So I don't know. I mean, you're going to have to pay me a lot for that apple because it's worth a lot to me. I only have 5 of them after all. Now, let's say that you have 100 apples. And I walk up and I say, ooh, those apples look pretty good, pretty tasty. Can I have one? Well, you have 100 of them. And so that one apple, it's going to be worth less because you have 99 others. It's a very different situation than if you only have 5 apples. Well, that's precisely how inflation works. When there's more dollars floating around the system, that means that the individual dollar is worth less money. If you want a good experiment, go to Google and type in inflation calculator. We'll probably get you there. And just look at the value of a dollar today versus, say, like, 1925 or even 1995. There'll be a big difference there, too. Because inflation is the culmination of money that has been printed and injected into the system. One other thing before we go on to the rest of the piece here about inflation. Don't get too caught up in the inflation numbers that are given to you week over week or month over month when they say, well, inflation is down to 2.7%. That doesn't mean that inflation is only 2.7%. Inflation is cumulative. So, for example, in this is March, and so if we printed a whole bunch of money in February, and we were printing less money in March, that doesn't mean that we've done away with the money that we printed in February. It's cumulative. You add it on top, and so anytime you see or anytime you're told that inflation has gone down to 2.7, no, that doesn't mean that we're only printing 2.7%. That means cumulatively over year, that number is lower than what we did a year ago, the same month a year ago. So it's cumulative. In reality, inflation is probably somewhere around 11%. But, it's, again, you got to understand what you're being told. But continuing on with the piece, quote, start with the CPI. The all items index rose 2.4% year over year in February, unchanged from January. Core inflation, which excludes food and energy, and see, this is another government trick. So when you hear the inflation numbers, those numbers do not include the price of food and they do not include the price of energy because politicians have conveniently took those out of the equation because if you left them in there, it would be a lot worse. So they measure inflation as a matter of the increase in the price of goods. And so when price goes up, you can figure how much inflation. That's the percentage that they're talking about. But the increase in the price of goods is driven by how much money is being printed by the federal government. And really what they do is it's not that, and it's just, and this is why they're creating money out of thin air. So the Treasury is the group that prints the money. The Federal Reserve is the group that, in both government, they create bonds. And then the federal government uses the money that they've printed to buy the bonds. And so it's this big giant circle, right? Nobody's actually creating anything new. It's just the government borrowing money from you and me, borrowing money from itself. All right, so it says, look specifically at the categories where pass-through was supposed to show up most visibly. And they're talking about tariffs, right? Tariffs don't have anything to do with printing money. The only thing a tariff is I'm charging you a fee to do business in my market. It's no different than advertising, right? If you want to advertise your product on this program, you're going to pay me a confiscatory advertising rate. At least I wish they were confiscatory. But you're going to pay me to advertise on my program, to participate in my market. That's what a tariff is. It's a tax that is charged to other countries so that they can sell their goods in the American market, which is what every country wants to do because this is the biggest market in the world. So it's a tax on other countries. Let's see here. Toys, a category the media screamed about loudly, actually fell 1.3% year over year. Television prices fell 0.8% for the month and are down 4.1% from a year ago. Shoe prices tumbled 0.5% in February and are up just 1.5%. Major appliances, these rose 0.2% in February and are up just 1.3%. Okay, so inflation is down. No matter what all of the talking heads said on TV, that all the tariffs were going to kill everything. Well, they didn't. Now, it was the Supreme Court that got rid of the entire Liberation Day tariff regime, wrongfully so, I might add. But they didn't create inflation because it's impossible for them to print money. There are two entirely different things. So when you see on the media, this is going to create inflation. No, it's not. The only thing that creates inflation is money printing. All right, so let's we're close to the bottom of the hour, so let's go ahead and take another break, and when we come back, we'll finish up the show. Make sure that you subscribe and follow the Cowboy State Politics podcast. You can do that from the website, cowboystatepolitics.com, or anywhere that you get your podcasts. That way, you'll make sure that you won't miss a single episode of Cowboy State Politics. Hunting season. Right about now, you're off with all of your pals, stalking the big gigantic elk or buck mule deer that you've been thinking about all summer long. And your lovely wife is at home, probably enjoying her time without you. But soon, my friend, all of that is going to come to a screeching halt. And I want you to think about just one little thing. She's able to park her car inside the garage because all of your hunting crap is with you right now. Now, if you'd like the marital bliss to continue, I suggest you make a call to Marcos and Jesse at Morton Buildings. Their phone number is 307-674-2532. They can build you a garage or a barn or any other type of metal structure for you to store all of your toys in so that your wife can continue parking inside the garage. And you can avoid sleeping on the couch for the next month or two. Call Morton Buildings. Their phone number is 307-674-2532. Get them to build you a metal building before it's too late. Welcome back to the program, Cowboy State Politics Live. I'm David Iverson, documented to be almost always right 99% of the time. You know, it's actually a pretty easy thing to do. I wish the media would attempt to do it. All you got to do is cite your sources. You know, double check your facts before you print them. That's all you got to do. And when you're wrong, admit it. That's what I do on the program. When I make an error, I lead with my mistakes. Fortunately, I don't have any mistakes to tell you about today. I'm just telling you what the media ought to do. Why I have such an amazing record of being right and why they don't. Which is why, we've had to issue some retractions. I think one of them, I guess a retraction on the Open Range record, one of our folks got something wrong. And they were the ones that picked up on it. And so the very next thing we did is we didn't go in and edit the article. We didn't change it. We didn't stealth edit it in the middle of the night. Nope. We put a notice right at the top and said, hey, we got this wrong. Our reporting didn't exactly hit the mark. And so here's the right answer, and we'll do better in the future. That's what media ought to do, and that is what they don't do. Which is why you should just pay attention to Cowboy state politics and the Open Range record and forget about all the rest of them. From ZeroHedge.com, former Air Force officer claims UFOs disabled nuclear missiles. And I quote, a former U.S. Air Force missile launch officer says unidentified flying objects once disabled several nuclear missiles at a base in Montana during the Cold War. Robert Salas, now 85, now he can talk because he doesn't really care, said the incident occurred in 1967 at Malmstrom Air Force Base, where he was on duty monitoring the LGM-30 Minuteman missiles. Speaking on the Danny Jones podcast, which, what he had to say was interesting, but the podcast, it's really, really terrible. I get it. Maybe some people think this podcast, stupidly think this podcast is terrible, but this one actually is. Anyway, according to Salas, the guards initially described fast-moving lights that stopped suddenly above the missile facility. Minutes later, one guard called in back in a panic, saying the craft emitted a reddish pulsating glow and it was hovering near the front gate. He also reported that one of the guards had been injured during the incident. The New York Post wrote that shortly after the call, warning alarms sounded inside the underground control center. Salas said the launch control panel showed one missile going offline, followed quickly by all of the rest of them. Within moments, all 10 missiles at the site became inoperable. Security teams were sent toward the missile silos, but Salas said they stopped after spotting the lights hovering above the launch areas and were too frightened to approach. An investigation later examined that the shutdown could not determine what caused it. Salas said the missile systems were designed with heavy shielding to prevent outside interference. He added that Air Force investigators required him and his commander to sign secrecy agreements afterwards. Like I said, the dude's 85 now, so, he doesn't really have anything to worry about. Warning them not to discuss the event. Salas said he eventually decided to speak publicly years later, after learning about similar reports in books about unidentified aerial phenomenon. Salas believed the incident may suggest the presence of non-human intelligence interested in preventing nuclear conflict, though the cause of the missile shutdown was never confirmed. Ooh, spooky news, my friends. Spooky news. Now, the truth is, I think it stands to reason that there is life on other planets. If there isn't, it seems like a gigantic waste of space, if you ask me. And I'm not talking about like outside, our planet. Yes, that's space. But the way I'm referring to it is there are, trillions of galaxies out there, and it is huge distances from even us to Alpha Centauri, the closest star to us. It's a gigantic distance. And so when you think about the vastness of space, it seems like that would be an awful waste if there weren't, life on other planets. It just makes sense to me. And I don't see why there are people that are so opposed to that idea. But, we keep having unidentified, unexplainable events. So maybe, just maybe, my friends, that's absolutely the case. Or, I don't know if we can say it's absolutely the case, but, at the very least, it leads us to believe. Now let's go to one of the worst journalists working, and I use that term loosely, because we have journalists at the Open Range Record that actually do their job. This is typically not a journalist. Doesn't really fit into any of the categories. In fact, right after the GOP meeting in Cheyenne, I was standing outside of the meeting, and Jasmine Hall, who's the author of this, she comes walking out, and I said, "Hey, Jasmine, I have a question for you." I said, what do you call it is that you do for a living?" And she gives me a quizzical look, and I said, "Well, the reason I'm asking is I'm pretty certain that it doesn't have anything to do with journalism. So I'm just curious what name you call it. What is it that you do?" Now, as you can imagine, she was horribly offended and stuck her nose in the air and tromped off. But in the media, they don't get held accountable very often, except on this program. But nobody would dare say that the work that they do is crappy or without merit. I'm saying a lot of the work that Jasmine Hall has done is crappy and without merit. But here's another one. Hold on just a second. You know what? We're going to go to another break, and I'll be back in just a second. All right. I need to come up with a button in case I need to take a quick break, a little interruption or something. But sorry for the interruption there. So let's get back to Jasmine Hall. So the title of this piece is "Wyomingites Call for a Lobbying Investigation in Response to the Check Passing Controversy." So now we're not calling it Checkgate anymore, because they realize that it doesn't really bear any resemblance to Watergate, which is anytime you hear the word gate attached to anything, Pizzagate, that actually happened in the Senate. But it's another story for another time. Yeah, hanging out with an actual lobbyist. Now, wait a minute. I think that might be a good story for right now. Hanging out with a lobbyist on the floor of the Wyoming Senate the entire time. And he admits that he's a lobbyist. I called him on the phone, and I asked him, we're talking about Apollo Pizzell, by the way. I called him and said, "Hey, so Apollo, how, as a registered lobbyist, did you get access to the Senate chamber?" And his exact words were, "Well, when I'm done with lobbying, I'm a Senate aide." Does that mean you're identifying as a Senate aide? Does that mean that maybe you're you might identify as something else, in your off hours? I mean, you can't be both at the same time. Which is the point here. When you're a registered lobbyist, that is, you are advocating on behalf of somebody else. So another company, for example. And Apollo Pizzell, he actually has a couple of different companies that he lobbies for. One of them is in Washington, D.C., and one of them is in Utah. There might be a couple of others, but those are the two that come to mind. But lobbying is you are working for another organization, and you are trying to convince legislators to support or defeat a particular piece of legislation. And so that is what lobbying is. And if you are one of those people, you have to register with the Secretary of State. Now, what they're referring to here is our pal Rebecca, and they're trying as much as they possibly can to put her into, find something that she did wrong so that they can punish her. Okay, well, she's not a lobbyist, nor was she engaged in any lobbying activity. But here's what the article says, and I quote, "At least two Wyoming residents," and this is very, very serious. Jasmine Hall, she attempts to write serious news. Anyway, "At least two Wyoming residents have asked state and law enforcement agencies to look into whether laws about lobbying and other political activity were broken after check passing on the floor of the House of Representatives." Well, first, the check passing was already determined that nothing untoward happened there, that there weren't any laws broken, that there weren't any rules broken. So nothing, no harm, no foul there. With the exception of the Laramie County Sheriff's Office, those agencies have not acted publicly. So the legislature did act publicly, but the Sheriff's Office, they announced their investigation on Facebook, and they're going to drag this thing out through the election just to use it as a political tool. Conservative activist Rebecca Bextel, my business partner and sponsor of this program, which I'm very proud of that, by the way, Jasmine Hall, you can go pound sand, handed checks to 2 representatives February 9th, starting a controversy that's been known as Checkgate. On March 5th, Stephanie Kessler, a Lander resident, asked the Wyoming Attorney General's office to investigate whether Bextel was lobbying, quote, on behalf of a corporation without registering as required under law. Wyoming law requires anyone who attempts to influence legislation on behalf of a corporation or certain organizations to register as a lobbyist within 48 hours of doing so. Kessler pointed to the for-profit Wyoming corporation Eyes on Wyoming, which Bextel started. Its website highlights her work on housing issues in Teton County. Kessler also pointed to the legislative event that Bextel hosted during the session sponsored by Eyes on Wyoming. Speakers highlighted bills focused on ending Teton County housing policy. So first, the reason why Jasmine Hall doesn't know what that town hall was about is she was kicked out because it was a private event, and Jasmine Hall tried to get in there, in which my pal Rebecca said, sorry, this event isn't open to the press. Now, I was there, but I wasn't inside the event. I was doing an episode of The Roundup right outside. Not that I couldn't be inside, but I had other things to do. But Jasmine Hall doesn't know what happened there because she wasn't in the room and she had been kicked out because the event was not open to the press. Now, in reality, what Rebecca covered in that was all of the housing scams that she's uncovered. Now, she did have one slide that talked about House Bill 141 and just said, hey, this is, you've heard me talk about this issue enough, but there is a bill this year. And there's videos that Liz Storr took herself. You can find those on social media, and it clearly shows exactly what I'm telling you. So Eyes on Wyoming, that's an investigative journalism endeavor. It's not a corporation that advocates against housing mitigation fees. That's the corporation that Rebecca uses to do her investigative journalism. There's a lot of effort she's doing right now to continue with this housing thing. And that's what it is. Okay. So it does not even fit the definition of lobbying, nor was she even lobbying anyway, because at the time the whole check thing happened was on day 1, February 9th of the legislative session. Rebecca wasn't in town for most of the legislative session at all. She was home in Jackson. In fact, she left that Wednesday. And so there wasn't really any time to do any lobbying if she was, and she wasn't. And so Jasmine Hall, you can go do whatever it is that you do with this thing that you attempt to call journalism, because it's not that. And according to the Tribune Eagle, for printing this stupid thing, you're just as guilty in trying to find something that we can pin on Rebecca Bextel. The truth is, there's nothing there. And my advice to you is to continue printing your drivel. I think that you should continue to write more articles that are full of conjecture. I think that would work out really good for you. And I would just encourage you to keep on, do what you're doing. In fact, I'm excited to see the next piece of drivel that you put out. Now, Kessler pointed to, let's see here, under Wyoming law, attempting to influence legislation on behalf of a corporation, whether compensated or not, constitutes lobbying, Kessler wrote. Hosting a legislative reception, speaking to legislators about pending bills and advocating positions on behalf of a corporate entity. So there's the question, right? So even if Eyes on Wyoming was an organization that, is for a specific cause, which is not, it's an investigative journalism outfit that Rebecca set up so that she could investigate all this housing stuff. But the question is, what does that corporation do? Well, it's not for one specific cause. Now, surely housing mitigation fees probably figure in there somewhere, but that's not the purpose of the organization, nor was she advocating on behalf of her own corporation. Let me give you another example. So Cowboy state politics is absolutely opposed to the Convention of States. Absolutely. Always have been. It's a dumb idea. We shouldn't even go in it. If you want to destroy the Constitution, that's the way to do it. Since I started this program, I have done so many episodes on why the Convention of States is a really, really bad idea. Now, I'm in Cheyenne during the legislative session, and this is a cause that I'm very committed to. In fact, I think it's a really, if you want to destroy the country, that's the way to do it. Now, when I'm there and that bill comes up, I testify in front of committees. I talk to legislators and I say, hey, this is a really bad idea. You should vote against this bill. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm advocating on behalf of my own company. It just means that this is an issue that I feel strongly about. And so the same holds true for Eyes on Wyoming. The purpose of Cowboy State Politics is not to destroy the Convention of States, though when I have an opportunity, I'll use it to that effect. But that's not the purpose. This is an opinion show. Its purpose is to make money for me and to inform you. But its purpose is not to lobby legislators, although when I'm in Cheyenne, that happens. You see, here's the problem. You have redcoats across the state that are desperately trying to find some fault somewhere, because as it sits right now, there was nothing wrong with exercising in a constitutionally protected act of free speech. There was nothing wrong with that. Now, there may have been some problems violating House rules, though they chickened out and said that no legislative misconduct had happened. Yeah, that's a total wuss move, guys. Sorry, I love you to death, but you kind of wussed out on that one. But it's not lobbying. This is not lobbying at all. Now, enter the name Michelle St. Louis. Now, if there were anybody that knows anything about lobbying, it's Michelle St. Louis. She pretty much does it for, spends all of her free time doing it. But she filed another complaint, too. Let's see here where it is. The other complaint. St. Louis's complaint also sought an investigation of lobbying rules compliance, but was far more reaching. St. Louis, a conservative? No, she's not. If what you're doing helps the left, then you are by definition on the left, and that's a lot of what Michelle St. Louis does. Asked for a review of Bextill's legislative floor access and authorization. Campaign contributions delivered inside the House chamber, coordinated political and donor activity, legislative reception and hospitality activities during session, for-profit entity operations, financial intake, and I love this last part, press credentials submission and compliance. Okay, so there we go. Now that it's printed, and by the way, Jasmine Hall, I think you should just keep up on that. But I think Michelle St. Louis has a lot more problems to deal with now, namely Reed Reisner, and perhaps she should focus on him. All right, let's see here. What else do I got? You know what? I know it's a little short today, but I've got a lot of topics that are going to take me a little bit longer to go into. So I think we're just going to call it good for today. Thank you for watching the program. I really appreciate it. Make sure you don't miss a minute of Cowboy State Politics. You definitely don't want to miss Ken's interview on the cow pie. That's a really, I think that you should watch that while drinking coffee. No, that's probably a bad idea because you'll spit it everywhere. Because he did a fantastic bang up job. So, we'll be back tomorrow, my friends, and for another episode of Cowboy State Politics. And at this 10 seconds, we should be back in the big studio downtown. Hopefully we'll be there for a while. So anyway, from the base of the Bighorns at the Cowboy State Politics studio, I'm David Iverson, and this is Cowboy State Politics. See you tomorrow, my friends.